Hi there, JC here with AutoCrit, and welcome to another edition of What's the Score, the series where we take best-selling authors and put their work through the AutoCrit ringer so you can see exactly what's going on under the hood. In this episode, we welcome a titan of publishing, the master of horror itself, Stephen King. Stephen King's name is almost always the first to come up when you ask someone the name of a famous author, and with good reason. Throughout a career spanning more than 40 years, King's novels have topped the charts, won esteemed awards, influenced artists far and wide, and have been adapted into audio plays, stage plays, TV series, and big screen movies. One of these novels is what we'll be looking at today, 1983's Pet Sematary. Regarded by horror fans as one of the King's most frightening works, Pet Sematary has now been twice adapted to film, a testament to the novel's characters, dark drama, and brooding atmosphere. And so today we resurrect Pet Sematary and subject it to thorough dissection using the only system capable of such a task, AutoCrit. So say it with me, what's the score? While many AutoCrit users often can't help themselves shooting for the stars when it comes to the overall AutoCrit summary score, we tend to find the majority of the acclaimed novels actually fit into the 70 to 85% bracket, and Pet Sematary is no exception. With a score of 70.83, it's a little distanced from novels we've already inspected, such as The Martian with 78.65 and The Hunger Games with 80.24. You can see those breakdowns by following the links in the description below. But even though the initial score might be lower than those other novels, it's still within that strong common bracket I mentioned earlier. Speaking of strong, looking at AutoCrit's fingerprint analysis, we can see the majority of indicators it's picked up for attention are found in the strong writing category, so that's likely where we'll find the lion's share of potential edits. Strong writing always tends to be the forefront category in any initial AutoCrit analysis, so don't be too worried if you see the same in your own reports. There isn't much of a difference in the number of indicators found for repetition and word choice in King's novel, and in that regard, the overall fingerprint sits closest to Suzanne Collins' The Hunger Games when referenced against our previous tests. For now though, let's tackle each section in our preferred order. With a tiny 4.4% of slow-paced paragraphs detected, Pet Sematary is one of the snappiest novels we've had the pleasure of analyzing so far. The reason for this becomes clear when you take a peek at the story's paragraph length graph. Here, King's paragraphs don't hang around for long, and we know that shorter paragraphs and shorter sentences often make for a snappier pace. What we can see if we take a look at the visual graph is the roller coaster effect we've come to expect from an absorbing story. It's subtle purely because of King's tendency to keep it snappy, but it's definitely there. Note the ups and downs like a series of hills. There's no flat or bland storytelling going on here. You'll notice the longest paragraphs appear around the middle, and there's a definite spike near the end. It's easy to imagine that these are the calm before the storm, and the climax recovery period that takes us into the finale. Going deeper, we can see a similar series of peaks and troughs in the novel's sentence structure. It's notable that King uses many more long sentences than other authors we've inspected in this series, yet manages to keep the pacing up. That might seem weird when you think about how short the paragraphs are, but what it tells us is that the author is probably making smart use of paragraph breaks to guide the reader's experience. Now let's check out the dialogue. We always like to point out the basic rule of dialogue tags. Wherever and whenever possible, always go with said or asked. It seems like King agrees and abides. King's use of said and asked greatly outweighs any alternatives, and that's a great start. But with AutoCrit, we can dig much further into what's actually going on. Looking at the most frequent dialogue tags, said and asked are right up front. You'll probably notice in this shot that said is highlighted by AutoCrit. All this means is that this particular word is overused here in comparison to what you'd find in the average successful novel. It isn't necessarily a bad thing if your book contains a lot of dialogue. Other highlighted tags we can see include whispered and muttered, so if you were editing Pet Sematary, you'd want to give those a look. It's interesting to see the bare minimum use of screamed, a word that often finds itself terribly overused by novice horror writers, but certainly not by Stephen King. Let's take a look at the manuscript itself with the dialogue in mind. Among the dialogue tags here, we can see that muttered appears 11 times. The sidebar shows you that the average is 7, while whispered appears 19 times against an average of 17. Muttered specifically tends to pop up mostly in dialogue from King's lead character, Lewis. He seems to be a man who mutters quite a bit. Could there be potential edits there? Or is it best left in as a consistent character trait? As always with AutoCrit, that's up to the author to decide in conjunction with their editor's developmental ideas. Too much muttering and a character might appear too bitter and self-absorbed to be sympathetic to the reader. Of course, we aren't doing a complete edit here, so it's difficult to say if even 1 or 2 mutterings could be chopped out without any negative effects. With the benefit of hindsight, though, we know that Louis Creed is a well-drawn tragic figure and readers haven't complained about him throughout the years, so we can say with some confidence that King got it right. Next up, let's hit some adverbs. King's advice is generally well known among writers. The road to hell is paved with adverbs, and considering there appears to be a lot of dialogue in the novel, the results aren't bad at all. We can see a few items here are highlighted as generally overused, which might be an opportunity to bring the summary score up a notch. Let's check it out inside the manuscript. These aren't massive changes to undertake at all. With only the uncommon hoarsely being recommended for a major trim, this definitely looks like it would be a quick and easy win if you were editing your own novel and saw a report like this. Next up, it's the strong writing category. Moving over here, let's stick to the topic of adverbs for now. The total reading for Pet Sematary sits between good and great, showing King is an author who definitely walks the walk. Once we hit the word level breakdown though, we can see there are a lot of highlighted words. As you know, this means they're overused compared to a successful manuscript of a similar length. There's no doubt a few of these could go, something which is almost universally common, but deciding on what to change means gritting your teeth and getting down to some tough work. In this example, we've jumped to a point where suddenly appears twice, with both instances quite close together. These are the kind of places you could look out for if you wanted to make a quick pass on your own novel, checking each adverb individually for repetitive instances. We can also see Pet Sematary's #1 adverb really popping up here. What you can see straight away in this passage, however, is that the adverb truly is a function of the narrative voice. As an author, one of Stephen King's greatest strengths is his ability to create a kind of down-home narrative that draws the reader into a sense of comfort and familiarity until the horror kicks in. A key part of this success is smart use of simple language. So while you can be fairly certain some of these adverbs could go, you should also keep in mind that with your own writing, there's always a balance to be found between AutoCrit's recommendations and what you, as the author, are trying to accomplish. Now let's move on to filler words. Whoa, a bit of shock here. We're in the red zone, so it's time to grab a drink and get digging. Up front is one of the #1 filler words of all time, that. We have 258 instances of that recommended for removal. Near the top we can see a variation. That's also numbered at a removal target of 71. The problem with that is that it's commonly used to pad out sentences, yet in many cases its removal would have no effect on the legibility of those sentences. Having spent some time jumping through Pet Sematary though, we find it hard to come up with many examples where this was the case in King's writing. Plenty of instances of that are actually embedded in dialogue and are a consistent part of those characters' speech patterns, as seen here with Jed Crandall, for example. For an idea when it comes to your own work, check out the line, "You remember the path there that your little girl commented on?" A line such as that could be edited down to, "You remember the path there your little girl commented on." Such a change doesn't functionally affect the dialogue, but these are decisions you're in charge of. You're the author. Moving on now, we see no major worries in terms of cliches and redundancies when taken in the context of our other novel inspections. These percentages are low numbers and easily in line with what we've come to expect from our averages. Things do hit the red zone once again though, once we get to showing versus telling indicators. The reason it is given as a showing versus telling indicator is because it does tend to indicate the author is giving information up too readily and sacrificing immersion. Consider statements like "it burned," "it hurt," or "it was disgusting." Things like this are much better conveyed through character action or reaction, rather than having the narration tell the reader outright. In the same vein, here we can also see some of the more common and generally strongest indicators of telling: felt and heard. These are classic examples where authors might be telling the reader what's going on instead of showing them, so those would definitely be our first targets. You'll probably notice other words highlighted here, such as saw, and this is where it's important to bring up tense. You notice a lot of your showing versus telling indicators appear to be past tense forms. Remember to keep in mind the tense of your novel. Looking at this report, we can easily suspect that Pet Sematary is written in past tense. With a quick check in AutoCrit, we find that, yes, indeed it is. When this is the case, you don't need to go pulling your hair out to get rid of every single recommendation. In King's case here, saw is obviously going to show up quite often. Still, you could maybe think about ways a character could be described as having seen something, maybe through a reaction that leads into description without ever actually using the word saw. Get creative with it. Let AutoCrit's recommendations inspire and guide you to find and try new things at different points in your story. That's what they're there for, not to slap you on the hand or dictate what you do, but to help you creatively conjure alternative ways to tackle storytelling. Stepping into the arena of word choice, generic descriptions look like another area in which we can find some big wins for Pet Sematary. We're in the red once again, telling us there may be a serious excess of generic language that will negatively affect your reader's sense of immersion. Among the most common words we can see looked, good, maybe, big, and suddenly. If you remember from earlier in this breakdown, suddenly was a word that also showed up among the most common adverbs, so we better put that first in line for a checkup. Looked, on the other hand, is another matter. Remember that this book is written in past tense. That's important. AutoCrit sees looked as a marker of generic writing because authors will default to saying things or people looked like a, or looked angry, or looked disgusting, but that obviously won't always be the case. Regardless, it's definitely worth hitting the editor to check out the numbers and see where things could quickly be tightened up if you don't have much time. So let's do that. Here we can see great, for example, should make for an easy tweak, with only 4 instances recommended for removal. Just about everything else will be a case of sitting down with AutoCrit, a mug of coffee, and some careful consideration. Moving on, we have quick and simple readings for sentence starters. These are sentences beginning with an adverb, and initial names and pronouns, which are sentences that begin with a character name or a standard pronoun. The sentence starters number looks right on point for highly praised novels, as does the result for initial pronouns. There's not enough to dig too deeply here, so let's just geek out at the numbers for a few moments and move on. Now it's time for repetition, and this one is very clear. Stephen King does not tend to repeat himself. Note how the words that AutoCrit has flagged for inspection as potentially overused are church, cat, Norma, and God. If you've read Pet Sematary, then you know why those words are common in the manuscript. Church is a cat and plays a major part in the story. Therefore, the word cat will appear more often than in your average novel. Norma, likewise, is a character. We'd probably take a minute to check out whether God appears a little too much, but we wouldn't want to bet money on there being pretty much anything to change here. Just out of interest, we loaded up the repeated words report in the editor anyway. Here's an example of King's skill using repetition. You can see here on the screen that AutoCrit lets you easily catch clusters of the same word wherever they occur, and makes for a great way to skim your way through while still being effective in your editing. Anytime you catch a cluster, it's up to you whether it's accidental or just repetition for effect. That said, let's wrap up and check out the readability scores for Pet Sematary. A flush reading E-score of 82 puts Pet Sematary at the easy-to-read level, meaning it's predominantly written in basic conversational English. As I said earlier, that's a big part of King's success as a magnetic storyteller. His absorbing conversational narrative flow washes over you, gets you familiar and relaxed, and then leads you by the hand down avenues of sheer unexpected terror. Finally, to top off this breakdown, let's check the summary score for Pet Sematary again, this time with AutoCrit's mystery suspense comparison setting. As we've seen consistently with other successful novels, the score rises when placed in a suitable category for the genre of the work. It's not a matter massive difference. After all, the basics don't just go out the window just because the genre changes, but it's an indicator that you're doing well. When performing your own comparisons, keep an eye on whether your score drops when compared to the genre in which you're writing. If that happens, try switching full time to editing using the setting for your genre instead of the default fiction option, and you'll definitely lessen the frustration. And that's it for this edition of What's the Score? We hope you've enjoyed the insight. If there's one thing you can say about your manuscripts once you've been through AutoCrit, it's that much like the residents of Stephen King's Pet Sematary, they don't come back the same. Thanks for watching! Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more bestseller breakdowns, plus a wide range of writing and editing advice to help your books be the best they can be. And if you feel like reinforcing your writing with the added power and confidence of AutoCrit, hop on over to www.autocrit.com to get started today. See you on the next one.